Welcome to the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast, a show dedicated to modern learning and development. With your hosts, Daniel Mendonca and Scott Babcock.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm Scott Babcock, and I am back on the mics with your co-host, Daniel Mendonca. Daniel reminded me it has been almost a month since we were, big air quotes, in studio together. Daniel, it has been a long time coming, but how you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy to be back. It's been a long time. I enjoyed the last episode. You got to, Star Wars out.
A little bit.
That was pretty good. Overall, just happy to be back on the mics. It's been quite some time, but it feels good to be back.
Yeah, it was weird. Daniel and I both had two meetings in one day, which sometimes we don't get two meetings anymore in a week. So to have it in one day was really exciting. To actually spend a little bit of time together. Now that we're doing bi-weekly podcasting, yeah, we're not on the phone together as much as we used to be, but that's all right. We're here today, and that's what's important. So
that's what matters.
Today we're gonna have a little fun. Well, I like to think we have fun every time we're on the mics, but we're gonna do something slightly different. We're going to talk a little bit about brand today, and some of you may be wondering, isn't this supposed to be a learning and development podcast? Yes, it is. So we're gonna make that connection for you. What does brand have to do with L&D? And there's a few different places where that comes in. So we're going to spend some time on that today. But without further ado, let's jump right in. All right, we want to kick off with ground zero. We want to talk about just specifically what is the importance or what is the space where learning can play with brand, and learning as a brand, and what's kicking off all of this. And then we'll obviously dive a lot deeper into some of the places where L&D impacts brand, and then what is the importance, the outcomes of focusing on brand. But let's start real quickly with just what is brand? Why do we want to start talking about this? And typically when we talk brand, we think marketing, we think advertising, we think products we all go to Target or Walmart or wherever to buy. And a couple things we want to talk about is that oftentimes I would imagine we've probably all had this dialogue at some point in our lives in the last 20 years. You're going to the store to pick up Kleenex, or you're going to the store to pick up Scotch tape, or you're going to the store to pick up, this is going to date us quite a bit, but to pick up the new iPod. And these are not things that exist anymore. And what we're talking about there is that those aren't actually the products that you're going to pick up. You're actually going to pick up facial tissues. You're going to pick up masking tape, or you're going to pick up an MP3 player. Again, something that doesn't exist anymore. We like to date ourselves here regularly in the world of really staying up on technology. But those brands are so strong that those are actually the companies that make a version of what it is you're going to buy, but we kind of ubiquitously apply their brand name to the product itself. So the power of branding, when we talk about it, that's what we're referring to, is that if you do branding really, really well, you become the name of your overarching product even your competitors can't overcome.
Yeah, I think when you look at the definition of brand, and being a name, term, or design, or a symbol that's associated or featured and identifies as a seller's product or service, I think, Scott, you outlined it perfectly, and how it positively affects people and negatively affects people. I was actually on a meeting yesterday, and we were talking about just general screen fatigue from the past 18 months, being virtual, being remote, being on meetings all the time, and how Zoom meeting came to this massive growth as a company, and everybody started calling their meeting online Zooms, which is a great example of branding. And then when we started talking about the idea of being screen fatigue, people started calling it Zoom fatigue. So it became a negative branding thing. And I think that those moments are great, no matter what industry you're in, to relate yourself and obviously you complete brand. I think the one that sticks out to me the most, and you brought up iPod, but is Apple as a company. They have such a strong brand to the point where people feel like they have to get all of their product when it comes out, no matter what it is. They released a little tag, to know where your devices are at all times, but they release a new iPad, they release a new laptop, whatever it is, AirPods. There's competing products, and in some cases superior products on the market. But typically, once you're part of their brand ecosystem, there's nowhere else you want to go, and you're constantly attracted to that brand, to the point where you will overcome a lot of objections or other things, to make sure you can relate to that brand. And I think that's something that L&D, which we'll touch on, can really influence and can interact with more than you would expect. But it is so important.
And we have hit on it at least a little bit in some of our past episodes where we've talked about the importance of sort of building up your own brand as an L&D organization. And the reality is that can go just as positively or negatively, depending on how you choose to show up. Um, a really good example of how even uh, the learning and development space can become a brand in and of itself, sometimes unintentionally. We were running an LMS, and obviously all of our clients typically name their LMS something. And one of them at the time was called Learning Lounge. And all of the employees stopped saying, "I'm going to go take training," or "I'm going to stop going," or "I'm going to go complete my learnings." All they kept saying was, "I'm going to do my learning lounges." And so, like, the name that even you choose as your site can become like a pseudonym for the content that you're also producing. And the reality is that carries through a lot. That's not only the name of the platform or the name of your organizational department. It becomes the thing they're doing, not just taking content, not reviewing the PDF, not going and getting the download of the job aid, but they're actually going to complete your LMS's name, right? And if you've done branding that well, that's actually probably a good thing that they're resonating with it. That it builds sort of a singular one-stop shop notion that that's where I go and it's what I'm doing when I get there. And that's a good thing for L&D to have that kind of a brand. And for the most part, it was positive that it was seen as these are good things to go do.
And I think as a segue to what we're going to talk about next, I'll bring up something that you just mentioned. When LMSs or LXPs or any sort of learning platform is released to employees or released to external users or other things, we always talk to our clients about the importance of brand, having your own identifiable logo, having your own domain, your own brand within, I guess, your overall company's brand. That way, you also have your own identity and your own messaging that you can build a community around, rather than it just being a extension of something. It's its own destination. And I think that's what branding has the ability to do. Is we talk about affinity, creating a feeling of connection or belonging to something. And I think that brand has the strong ability to do that regardless of what department or area you're in within a company.
So let's go ahead and dive into our second section of our podcast today, and it's sort of continuing the conversation. We've probably hit on a few of these items before, but let's talk about why on a L&D based podcast we're talking about branding. Now, we mentioned a little bit about the L&D department having its own brand, and obviously that is a portion of what we're talking about. But we also want to talk about how learning can impact a brand. So obviously, companies go out, they spend lots and lots of money on marketing and advertising. They go through these campaigns and promotional periods to get their name out there, to talk about what their brand is, right? And those are going to be marketing dollars. But L&D, as it stands, has a huge impact for both your employees, your business partners, your outside sales folks, in terms of representing your brand or feeling a connection to your brand. And that really, I think, is a great way for L&D to impact the outcomes that we'll talk about in a little bit. But L&D can be a really strong place to help build affinity around what a brand is and how they can maybe tie personally or professionally back into that brand.
I think in the world we live in today, every company is focused on who they are rather than just what they sell or what they produce. And that means their culture inside their organization, the environment they empower, and they want not only their employees to feel that, they also want their customers to feel that as well. And people make a lot of purchasing decisions based upon the core values, the mission, the vision of the organizations, that they like. And when we think about education or learning, internally, externally, whether it's with your employees or people who represent your product outside, making sure they understand the mission, vision, and values of your company is a part of the L&D or the training process. That's so important from a brand perspective. A lot of times when people talk about brand, we think about what something looks like, what the logo appears like, what's their color palette, internally, how their logo looks on a t-shirt or other things like that. But branding really comes down to how visualization or words or messaging makes you feel. And I think maybe it's something that is underestimated, but learning and training has a obligation to talk about why a company is what they are, why they sell what they sell, um, and evidently, create a messaging to build a customer community or a community around their products rather than just a transaction. And I think that's what people are expecting more and more from brands nowadays. You can't just create a transaction; you have to create a community, and I think that's something brand specializes in making you feel.
And when we think about the learning side of this, there's always a component of learning that is informational, right? I want to get you specs, or I want to get you features, or functionality. Um, but I think learning also has a opportunity to make connections to what is real in your world with that product, right, or that service. So Daniel referenced Apple, and there are obviously alternatives out there. But one of the things that I think um, draws people in once they're a part of it is that ecosystem. I know that very easily my Apple TV, my iPhone, my AirPods are all going to seamlessly talk to each other. They're going to connect easily. I've experienced that from having the products. But if I'm someone who's like, why would I switch from a Google phone to an Apple phone, or why should I go from Roku or Fire Stick to an Apple TV? That's where your salesperson has to make that connection for that customer, right? And we're using them as an example, but this happens with all of your products. Like, why should I buy that? And usually it's not the specs, it's not the feature sets. Being able to regurgitate what was on a comparison chart isn't usually the reason. It's being able to tell a story that connects that user back. Describe to them, like, I struggle with connections, and so being able to tell them the story of ease that is involved with this ecosystem of product. Or I'll give you another good example. I have kids now that are reaching an age where the internet is a thing that they're spending more and more time on. They're playing games, and I want to have greater control on that as a parent. When looking for products that will easily make it my job simpler to control what they see, how they see it, how much time they're spending, um, there are great products out there, I'm sure, but the messaging and what I'm able to learn through some of the content and materials that are presented to me made me choose Circle as a product. So Meet Circle is this great product that limits my kids' time and energy and what they can see in websites. That's because of the content or the messaging I was able to learn about that product and now feel comfortable with it as a solution to my unique needs. So I think L&D tells that story for a lot of folks and really bridges the gap on what ultimately draws them to feel more confident in a product and thus build affinity for that product.
It's funny you bring up Circle. There's a really good story, maybe for a time for another day, about something to do with Meat Circle. But we won't bring that up today. Maybe that'll be a positivity point. Um, it's so interesting because we actually talked about this the other day. Creating that story for your sales team as an example, and I'll always go to sales. A lot of the work we do with our partners is about training retail sales associates inside of retailers where they sell product that have a brand behind it. And like you said, Scott, a lot of times it's not um, the best product that gets sold. It's the one that has the most brand because the sales associate is the most familiar with it. They're the most comfortable with it. They've maybe used it themselves because they own it. So a lot of times learning and training from an external perspective is really centric around making sure that people feel in tune with your brand so they can make that recommendation. And that communication and that open dialogue around brand is just so important.
So we now know the importance of like the brand component of what L&D can do. We understand a little bit about how L&D can influence brand and what is the importance of driving brand with both your employees, with your customers, internally to your organization. Just understanding that brand component. But let's talk about the ultimate outcomes. We've talked about the how, if you will, but let's talk about the why. What are you getting when you focus on brand for your employees or for your products or for your services? And specifically, when we talk about learning and development and what that brand affinity can do, what are some of those outcomes? And I'll like the one that obviously I think comes up first and foremost, and we can dive deeper into it, is when your employees, specifically if you're working in sort of a sales or a delivery capability business, you're going to see greater sales because folks are going to find that connection point. And so, from a learning and development standpoint, that affinity obviously is important, but understanding those solutions. So, I mentioned the idea that the things we tend to feel that affinity towards or feel that connection towards from a product and service, a lot of times is understanding how it fits to our reality. So, is your learning driving solution oriented problem solving with your employees? And ultimately, if you're doing that with customers and understanding their needs and fitting and making recommendations based on that, you're ultimately going to see greater sales just because you're making more connections with those customers.
I think greater sales is something that speaks really well to me, because I think that it's so true. One of the things when we talk about branding for employees or sales associates, I find is we've talked before in this podcast about how millennials, Gen Zs, just people nowadays with modern jobs are more likely to move on, and find other roles that speak more to them. And when we talk about the importance of branding for your employees, it's creating that affinity with your employees that makes them not only want to sell more product, but want to stay and work hard and feel like they're part of something, and have a message that speaks to them. And you see these companies with these global visions that sound like they're going to change the world and affect everything. But I think it's to give somebody something to look forward to and that they feel like they're a part of, which adds to that branding. Um, I also feel like, as part of what Scott was saying related to the sales part of it, good branding and building that brand affinity empowers employees to feel like they're part of the brand rather than like just, an extension of it, which I think is a something that's unique. Scott, when you talk about the importance of branding for employees, um, and you talk about internal employees, what are ways you've seen, you've worked some for some really large companies, what are ways you've seen that branding can trickle down to employees or is explained to them?
Yeah. So when I think about this, there's probably some concrete examples we can give too. But so one of the ones, and I think Daniel, in terms of you probably will remember this, is it. Sometimes we see training as like this have to moment for a lot of companies, right? And especially when it comes to compliance based stuff. But an area where understanding the brand that's associated with the training you're putting out, and ultimately your company and your organization, trying to give a more connected experience, is take the example of something like harassment training, right? A lot of times for employees, it's daunting. I always have horrible PTSD around like these 1980s horribly acted videos that I used to have to watch during onboarding with companies. And I think more and more, when we talk about the idea of building a brand around these, it's shifting that notion from sort of this, hey, we went out and bought this thing that takes 2 hours and it's kind of exhausting and it's a little over the top in a bad way, and turning that around. And so, one of the projects that we've had is to take that and turn it into a moment that is a bit more playful, still landing the message, but people don't feel like it's a drain on them. And so I think in that way, brand can be something that's built up. And so they turned it into a way to engage while defeating harassment as a persona almost. And so the experience was to learn all the ways that harassment can show up and the ways you combat it as an employee, but putting a backdrop around it that had some fun. And ultimately, that led to a series of compliance based content that was now around sort of this new brand for learning that organization had built. And I think that's one way that you can start to set a tone for your learning is meant to be impactful, but also enjoyable, if you will, or to be not to be a drain on everything that's happening. Um, and there goes my dog, deciding someone's at the door. Apologies. Real world happening right around us. But so from an organization perspective, that's one concrete example I can give. I actually just read a book by the former CEO of Best Buy, Hubert Joly. It's called The Heart of Business. Highly recommend it to everybody. But Daniel referenced like these global visions or these higher priorities. That brand, if it's associated with you feeling passionate about the work you do, so tying those two things together, what is the vision of the company? But more importantly, what's your place as the people part of the business and how you're going to reflect? And learning has a huge impact to helping sell again that solution. How does this show up in real life and make a connection for you? I think you just find that affinity back to the company and organization through that brand kind of advocacy that gets built.
I think that's so interesting, and it speaks to, I guess, the employee journey from start to finish, which I guess we can talk about the also with the consumer journey. But you bring up those trainings right when you join the company. I think that your that first impression is everything in terms of brand and who the company is, and it really puts an emphasis on being clear and right from the start. If you're an organization that believes in X, Y, and Z, you need to make sure you get that out front. That way people can buy in and continue down that process.
When onboarding is right, it's your first chance to speak to a brand new employee, and we probably all have really bad stories, horror stories of onboarding programs, and we probably have all, or at least heard, some really great experiences. And if you have a brand that is kind of thought through and really built out strategically as opposed to just thrown together, you can impact. Oh my gosh, this is my first day on the job. This company is out of tune. This company is dry. This company is bland and boring. Or the alternative is you can say, hey, I'm already like, this is going to be exciting. I see a company that is put some thought into this and has a clear message, and I feel connected to the brand immediately. If you can set those things up on day one, that's a huge telltale indicator for that employee of I'm going to enjoy my job, or I'm already looking for the next one, right? And I don't know how accurate this number is. I've seen different versions of it, but it's probably pretty close that the average employee today, these newer employees entering the workforce, may experience 20 plus jobs in their career. That means there's not spending a lot of time typically at any one job, the gig economy type of thing. Why not try to land that message up front that not only have you started a job that you're just getting into, but let's sell the vision that this is a job you're going to want to keep. And then maybe you retain some of those folks a little longer than the statistics maybe say you would. Moment. That's what that was. Just hot air. All right. This is a topic I think we could probably spend many more podcasts on. We could dive really deep into a lot of like the background and the data that comes behind marketing and the strategies that go into it. So maybe we'll shelve some of that for a later podcast, but a good conversation around the importance of brand. And I think it's a conversation we don't hear enough of amongst clients and in organizations we've been in, that the groups and parts of organizations should start to think about the way they show up as a brand. I think we do it personally a lot. What is my brand personally and how I show up with my teammates and peers? But what do we as a group, or what do we as an organization stand for, or how should we be represented? Things like that. So a good conversation. I'm glad we were able to spend some time on it today. Hopefully we get to touch on it various points throughout some of our other episodes as well. But we want to leave you, as we always do, with a little happiness, a little positivity, bring a little energy back to the listeners and the audience on what's cool going on in our world right now and what we're excited about. Maybe outside of the world of business sometimes, or sometimes it's connected. But I will kick off, and I think Daniel and I'm guessing, are probably very much in line and in tune with a similar concept or topic today. This is fall camp started this week for youth baseball. We had a little reprieve, a few months off, where the boys have been doing some flag football, which is fun to see them do some different stuff. But they are back with the bats and the gloves. Not so much the gloves. It's been very rainy here, so we haven't been able to get on a field for defensive practice. But they started hitting this week. Every night this week they've got practice, and we play our first tournament starting on Saturday for the fall season. It's a short burst, only 5 weeks, but it's been fun to see the boys get back in the swing of things again, pun intended, I guess. On that one, I'm dropping lots of those today throughout conversations, but no, just enjoyable to be back, and the camaraderie and the fun of watching these boys compete is always a good time.
Awesome. That's sounds good. I'm sure the boys are excited about that. It is also rainy here, Scott, and that is in reflection of what my positivity point is. Tonight, the university season starts up again, so we are back. We've been at it for about 6 weeks now, training, preparing for tonight, and we are going to play in what is the rainiest day of calendar 2021 for Windsor, Essex County, which is obviously where we're located. So should be a fun one tonight. Happy to be back. It has been, because of COVID, 693 days since our last university game. So everybody is chomping at the bit, and we are excited to be.
That's crazy. Hard to believe it's been that long. I'm curious. So I do not know a lot about soccer or football, as it's called in the majority of the world. But does a soccer ball get heavier when it's wet, or does it repel water pretty well?
No. Yeah, so historically soccer balls were leather. So at what point they'd become just a weight. But now they're a synthetic, so they do not get heavy.
See, that's an advantage. See, like I'm diving deep into a totally unrelated subject, but something I'm curious about. So in football or baseball or whatever, when the balls get wet, they get heavier, they get harder to throw, harder to control, things like that. So I'm just curious. Good to know. I'm Scott Babcock. I'm excited that I was able to spend some time back with your co-host Daniel Mendonca, and we will talk to you next week.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.